Welcome. This is the lecture for Chapter 8 on the Slutsky equation. The way I learned it, it was called the Slutsky decomposition versus the Hicks decomposition. I'll show you why in a minute. Substitution effect, income effect. Here's what they are. Let's see if I can get this pen working. Yes. Okay. When we have looked at the budget line before, for example here, these are all the possible consumption bundles of thing 1 and thing 2. The person's income is M, and at these prices, we have this budget line. Now, this line, we call it the budget constraint. Loosely, we just call it the budget line, but it's the constraint. Everything inside the budget constraint, however, up to and including the line, these are all consumption bundles that this person can afford. So this yellow area is, and again I want to emphasize that includes the line itself. This is what we call the budget set. This is the set of all consumption bundles this person can buy. But we tend to ignore the budget set because we know this person will not buy that consumption bundle. It's inside the budget constraint. It's not on the budget constraint. This person can afford this much of thing 1 and that much of thing 2, but they're not going to pick it because going this way, they could have more of both. And they'll keep going this way until they reach the budget line, the budget constraint. We know the person will pick some bundle on the constraint because that's, of all the bundles in the budget set, it is only one on the budget constraint, on the budget line, that will get this person to the highest indifference curve. In this case, if the indifference curve was like that, it's this bundle. Okay. So it's understandable to me why we tend to ignore the budget set and just look at the budget line. But for this lecture, I want us to flip that. Instead of focusing on the budget line, the constraint, think of the budget set. How do we say how much a person has, how wealthy a person is? Well, one way to do it is this way. How much money do you have? How many dollars? How many yen? How many pounds of gold? Whatever. That's one way to express how wealthy you are. But there's another way. The other way is to think of how many choices you have for consumption. For that, that's the budget set. Here, this person can have anything in that triangle. If the triangle was bigger, that's one way of viewing that this person would be better off, more purchasing power. Well, we think of the income of the person when we've talked before about, well, a person's income goes, excuse me, their income goes up. We're talking about their income in dollars. For example, a new budget line might be, assuming I can draw it more or less correctly, might be there. This person got a raise. It used to be this person could only choose things in there. Now they can choose anything in this much bigger triangle. Their budget set has become larger, richer. But there's another way that can happen. Here we're going to assume that the person's income in number of dollars is fixed. That does not change. But what happens if there's a price change? This person starts out on this budget line. Assuming I can make this work again. All right. And they're on that budget line because they have this number of dollars and the price of thing 1 is P1 and the price of thing 2 is P2. So if this person wants to spend all their money on thing 2, they'd be able to buy this many dollars divided by the price, that much of X2, or that much of X1, of thing 1. Now, assume the price of thing 1 goes down. Well, if the price goes down, that means the person, if they spend all of their income on thing 1, they can buy more of it. So they would move from here out to there. It's important you keep those straight. If the price goes down, the budget line swings out. Well, we know that geometrically, looking at the budget line, how far in or out it is from the origin is income. That's if the person gets more money, the budget line moves out from the origin, but it stays parallel to what it was before. Because it's the slope of it that tells you the relative prices of thing 1 and thing 2. So if the prices change, the slope changes. If your income changes, it keeps the slope but moves in and out. But here we see a price reduction in thing 1. Income in dollars has not changed. But look at the budget set. It's gone from this person can choose anything in here. Now, with the same dollar income, they can choose anything in this much bigger triangle. So if you think of, not in terms of dollars, but in terms of purchasing power, how wealthy you are, well, that's the area of the budget set. And this person's budget set is now much bigger. So this person is, in a sense, wealthier, even though the number of dollars they have has stayed the same, because they have more purchasing power. So on the one hand, your income is the number of dollars you have. But you can also think of it as how many choices you have. And when the price goes down, you have more choices. So it's kind of like your income went up. Okay, so if this happens, you're going to re-optimize, obviously. Let's say you were on that indifference curve and you optimized there. Now you're on this new budget line and, well, let's say there's some sort of indifference curve there and you'll re-optimize to some new point on a higher indifference curve. Okay. But why did you re-optimize to that point? Because actually there are two things happening here. The slope of the budget line indicates the price ratio of these two things, the relative prices of X1, of thing 1 and thing 2. That's the slope. Well, that has changed. The relative prices have changed. The price of thing 1 went down. So thing 1 relative to thing 2, thing 1's cheaper now. And compared to thing 1, thing 2 is now relatively more expensive. So the relative prices, the price ratio has changed. That by itself will change your optimum consumption bundle. You're probably going to want to buy less of the thing that's relatively more expensive now and more of the thing that's relatively cheaper. That is what we call the substitution effect. You're substituting away from something that is now, by comparison, more expensive, and you're substituting towards something that is relatively less expensive. But that's a substitution effect, but there's a second effect. The fact that your budget set is so much bigger now, you can now pick all of these things, if you want, in addition to these. Well, you have more choices, so you're kind of richer. It's kind of like as if your income had gone up. Well, we know if your income goes up, you will re-optimize to a new optimum consumption bundle. The fact that you're richer, functionally, means you're going to pick a different consumption bundle. And you would do that even if the relative prices had not changed. So the total reallocation you do is partly because the relative prices have changed and partly because you have so many more choices. You're functionally richer. That's the income effect. So, if you're in this situation, where this was the original budget line, and you optimized there, and then the price of thing 1 drops, so the budget line swings out. Your income in dollars is the same, but your budget set is much bigger. So on the one hand, the relative prices have changed. On the other hand, you're also kind of richer. You're going to re-optimize. Let's say you re-optimized to, if I can draw it very badly, oh gosh, I don't know, something like that. Well, you've changed from this consumption bundle to this consumption bundle. But how much of that change was because the relative prices changed, and how much because you have a so much bigger budget set. Your purchasing power has gone through the roof. There's a way to find out. Since there are these two things, both causing you to change your consumption choice, what if you could subtract out, you could back out one of them? Then whatever was left in your change would have to be because of the other effect. You can do that. Now, let's say you're at this new budget line here, and you have reallocated to, let's say, there. What if we could keep the relative prices, X1 relatively much cheaper now than X2, the thing 2. So keep the new relative prices, but subtract off, back out the additional purchasing power you had. If we could do that, then whatever change you made from here to whatever the new bundle would be has to be entirely due to the substitution effect, entirely caused by the change in relative prices, because we've backed out the change in effective income. How do you do that, though? How do you keep the price ratio, that is, the slope of the budget line, the new budget line, but not have it be farther out from the origin? You do it this way. You take the new budget line, you preserve its slope, because that represents the relative prices, but you just pull it back in towards the origin. You're taking back the additional purchasing power, and you keep moving it in towards the origin until at the same new slope, the same relative prices, it intersects the old consumption bundle, so that the original consumption bundle that you could just barely afford before the price change, now on this new, admittedly imaginary budget line, you can still just barely afford the old consumption bundle. Well, if the thing that you chose before and you could just barely afford, now in this thought experiment you can also just barely afford, then you're not functionally richer. We have, by pulling the new budget line back in, we've taken away the income effect. You don't have a bigger, in a sense, income. So you preserve the slope, the relative price change, but you pull it back in to take back out the effective increase in income. Okay. Now, so let's say you're at this new imaginary budget line where you have the new prices but the old purchasing power. You can just barely afford the old consumption bundle. Well, just because the relative prices have changed without any income effect, you're still going to reallocate. You're going to want to buy less of the thing that is relatively more expensive now, and more of the thing that is relatively less expensive now. You will shift your consumption from this bundle to this one. It'll cost exactly the same as the original bundle, but it'll get you to a higher indifference curve. A little bit higher. Okay, so this change from, if I can make this work, from here to here on this new imaginary budget line, this is the part of the change going to this new real budget line. This change from this bundle to this one is the reallocation change you made only due to the change in relative prices, the slope. The substitution effect caused you to buy more of thing 1 and less of thing 2. Well, if that is the change from here to here due only to substitution, due to the relative price change, then the rest of the change, because remember, you started here, price of thing 1 drops, now you're buying this combination. Well, if this change from here to here is all due to the substitution effect, the change in relative prices, then the change from here to here, that must be due only to the income effect, you being functionally richer. Going from here to here, is your total change caused by a combination of the income effect and the substitution effect. If I can do this, trying to write with a mouse, the total change equals the income effect plus the substitution effect. Well, this is the substitution effect. So we've essentially subtracted out the income effect. But you can also write that as the total change, whoops, writing with a mouse is more difficult than it seems. The total change minus the change due to the substitution effect. Whatever's left over has to be income effect. The change from here to here, this is the income effect. This is the substitution effect. Put them together, and you get that total change. So by taking the budget line, the new budget line, which is changed in two ways, its slope is changed, indicating a change in relative prices, and its distance from the origin is changed, indicating a change in functional wealth. By bringing it back in, we've removed the increase in functional wealth. Therefore, we have decomposed the total change into the substitution effect and the income effect. Let's see. A lower price for thing 1 makes it feel as if we have a larger budget. Now, how does this work with normal goods? Remember, a normal good is something where if your income goes up, you buy more of it. Steak. Movies. If that happens, then for a normal good, the income effect and the substitution effect both push you in the same direction. Here, again, we're assuming the price of thing 2 stays the same, and your income in dollars stays the same. The only change in the environment is the price of thing 1 drops. So the budget line stays anchored there. This end swings out to here. Now, keeping it parallel, but moving it back in to where the old consumption bundle is just barely affordable. Well, this new imaginary budget line, in a way, represents the change just due to the change in relative prices. Let's say you reoptimize to there. So, the change from here to there is only due to the substitution effect. It causes you to buy more of thing 1. Price of thing 1 went down, you buy more of it. That's straightforward. But the income effect. You're functionally richer at this new budget line. Well, if you're richer for a normal good, and we're assuming thing 1 is normal, you're going to buy more of it. Your income goes up, you buy more of normal goods. So the income effect also says buy more of thing 1. Thing 1 is cheaper, buy more. You're richer, buy more. They go in the same direction. Now, for thing 2, that's not the case. The substitution effect, just the change in relative prices. Well, X2 is relatively more expensive now, so you're going to buy less of it. You move from here down to only buying this much of it. So the substitution effect says thing 2 is relatively more expensive, buy less. But the income effect says you're richer, buy more of everything, so buy more of thing 2. So for thing 2, the substitution effect says buy less, but then the income effect says buy more. And that's why this point is a little higher on the vertical axis than that one. Now this is also a normal good, because your income goes up, just that is making you buy more of it. Let's see. That's for normal goods. Now let's look at an inferior good. A normal good, your income goes up, you buy more of it. An inferior good, your income goes up, you buy less of it. As you get richer, you tend to shift away from it. Think again, ramen noodles. When you're poor in college, like I was, you eat a lot of it. You get rich, you don't buy it so much. So, for an inferior good, let's assume that thing 2 is a normal good, but thing 1 is an inferior good. Thing 1 is ramen noodles. Okay, you start out here. Then the price of this inferior good goes down. So the budget line swings out. It's often worth mentioning that the harder it is to draw the decomposition, the less common it'll be in the real world, which is why this gets a little messy. But I'll try to make it clear. Okay, so you are at this new budget line. And it doesn't show you here where you've reoptimized to, but somewhere or other. Now, you take this new budget line, keep the relative prices, but slide it back in to where the old consumption bundle was just barely affordable. So you've now subtracted out the income effect. And let's say you would reoptimize to here. So for thing one, the price of thing one is relatively cheaper. So you increase your consumption of thing one due to substitution. And it gets you on a slightly higher difference curve. Substitution effect is the same. But remember, the substitution effect is about the effect caused only by a change in the price ratio. It's not about your income. And an inferior good, just like a normal good, it's called that because you consume it in different amounts based on your income changing. So since this is an inferior good, the income effect, being functionally richer, should make you buy less of it. Well, let's say the total effect is here. So the substitution effect says thing one is cheaper, buy more of it, but it's an inferior good. So you're richer, buy less of it. It takes the amount of thing one you're buying back down. So this is the net effect. Now, for a Giffen good. Giffen goods, I think I mentioned before, it's still a little iffy whether they really exist in the real world. I think they do, but they're extremely rare. A Giffen good, remember, is a good that violates the law of demand. Its price goes up, you buy more of it. And it's easy to see the challenges with even drawing Giffen goods, let alone finding them in the real world. Okay. You start on this budget line, the blue one. The price of thing one drops. You know what? I already got it wrong. Let's start over. Okay. You start out on this budget line. And you're at the black point. The price of thing one drops. And so you shift in the real world to this budget line. And you re-optimize from the black dot to the green dot. Now, let's decompose that. You take the new budget line, keep its slope, but move it back to where the old consumption bundle is just affordable. Like that. And we look at what would you do if you faced that budget line. Well, you would switch from the black dot to the blue dot. Thing one costs less now, relatively less. Well, that would make you want to substitute your consumption towards thing one, the thing that's relatively cheaper. But thing one is also an inferior good. That would say you're functionally richer, buy less of that. But here, this thing is so inferior. Consumption of this drops so fast when your income goes up even a little bit that the income effect, saying you're richer, buy less, overwhelms the substitution effect. It's bigger. So you end up, you start with buying this much of thing one. The substitution effect says buy more, but then the income effect says buy much, much less, and you end up here. Well, that's a little not aligned correctly, but still. You end at the total there. So the net is going from here to there. The net effect is the price of X1 went down, you buy less of it. It violates the law of demand. Interesting. I think it helps understanding the concept and different ways that you can decompose choices into income and substitution effect. Let me show you one other thing. The book focuses on the Slutsky decomposition. There is another. I think it mentions it very briefly. The Hicks decomposition. In the Hicks decomposition, it's just the same, except instead of moving the new budget line back, the question is, how far back do you move the budget line to fully remove the income effect? In Slutsky, you move it back until the old bundle is just affordable. That's nice because, well, you know what the old bundle was. You can observe purchasing decisions. But there's another way you could do it. You could take the new budget line and move it back. Let's see if I can draw this. Whoops. And move it back, not to the old consumption bundle, but rather to the old indifference curve. So you would move it back a slightly different amount. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. The red budget line, I know it's hard to see, is the substitution effect only budget line in the Hicks decomposition. You're moving back to the old indifference curve. Let's see if I can get the pen color for that. But in the Slutsky decomposition, you would move, you'd move it back a slightly different amount, not to the old indifference curve, but rather to the old consumption bundle. For very small changes in price, the two are going to be essentially equivalent. But just be aware that there is this slightly different way to do it that is useful in some circumstances. Okay, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the lecture.